or if any agency or legal discovery process says, we want to see the documents for this box, they have to come to us. And only us. They can't go to Google. They can't go to Anytime Mailbox. They can't go to iPostal One. They can't go to AWS. They have to come to us for those documents. And if they come to us, we'll say, well, tell you what, why do you need them? Your contents of your envelopes and your mailings are not put in the cloud, nor are your personal information. Not even your home address is in the cloud. We don't even put in that. We put in your PMB address in the cloud. That's your address. We keep the data minimal in our environments so that you can move it over to your environments and you have complete control of the information. And even if we get served a subpoena, we can say, well, we don't have anything.
Thanks for joining me today, Dallas. I have a lot to cover, and it's a lot more technical than probably what people are used to in terms of real-world privacy. So I want to start by just asking a little bit about you and your organizations.
Okay, well, let me make this really quick. Dallas is my pseudonym. It's after Dallas Winston from Dally in The Outsiders, if anybody can date themselves to that forced read in high school. But I have been a South Dakota resident and a per se digital nomad, flag theory, geographic arbitrage started in about 2016. And that's when this whole, right around the same time of the Snowden incidents is when I really started looking at privacy. And at the same time, a separate path looking forward to what I would do and where I would go, started this geographic arbitrage. And the geographic arbitrage started in the US. I started working in different states that had more tax advantages. And I started an LLC and was then doing independent contracting. Then that extended to international once I hit my 50s. At that time, too, I was using digital mail services. And I discovered very quickly that one of the best states to choose if you are more location independent is South Dakota if you're a US resident and you need to choose a state for taxes and so forth. So I chose at that same time, 2016, South Dakota. Currently, I'm spending a majority of my time with my businesses developing them in South Dakota, about half my time, and then the other half I am in Europe working on my residency. So by next year, I will have a European passport. And that is
Oh,
my goal.
congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I know that can be a big challenge to try
It
to
is.
get. Yeah.
It is. It is.
I assume you don't want to share where.
No, it's okay. Portugal, because it's other broadcasts I've
Nice.
said. Portugal. Yeah,
Yeah.
so Portugal is pretty much the gateway for residency in the EU. They're easier than other countries. They have less friction and pain points. Unless you're a multimillionaire, then there's many other options for you. But to do it by time versus money, Portugal is the place to get your EU residency.
Nice. Well, congrats. And I'm sure we can
Thank
talk
you.
a little bit more about
Yeah,
that as we get to know you a little bit better. But what about your orgs? I know you have a couple of them and they do very similar things. So why do you have
correct.
two orgs that do almost the same thing? And who are
Right.
they targeting?
Well, so first of all, let's talk a little bit back up. I should have said too, when I did my contracting, that I was my specialty was cybersecurity in healthcare. So I dealt a lot with privacy, especially in the HIPAA realm and so forth. So that kind of melded into my professions once I started transitioning from being an independent contractor to then doing my own thing. But Privacy Post was the first endeavor that I started within the address of 112 South Main. But when I designed 112 South Main, which was a very specific design and it is a brand, the 112 South Main, and how it was structured. It was structured to be able to create multiple entities that focused on specific market segments, and then they would come into 112 South Main, and then 112 South Main would use similar infrastructure, but then different sub processes within that. So Privacy Post was my first endeavor within this. And one of the reasons I really motivated with Privacy Post was working with several different mail forwarding providers, and we call them virtual mail services, CMRAs. The privacy and the security, both from a physical aspect and also from a digital aspect, just didn't meet my requirements. And so I wanted to boot up something that was much more private. So that was the birth of Privacy Post. As Privacy Post grew and the processes were refined because many of the people that wanted to use the service didn't need the requirement of privacy at the level that we had. And that level of privacy is very expensive because it's a very manual process, and we can talk about that later. Then to really get this cash flowing, I needed another market segment, and that is people that just want a good mail service, and they've chosen South Dakota as their state of residency. So then I started WorldPost. WorldPost is more for people who don't need that ultra level of privacy. And as WorldPost started gaining traction, I started realizing I could market a hybrid where people who come into privacy posts and like, I really need privacy, I value privacy, but my wife, we're a family, she's not going to do this. She's not going to get into this, and say, okay, tell you what, we can do a hybrid. We can take privacy post, and I can take some aspects of privacy post and then move them over to WorldPost, where you have some conveniences of automation and the cloud and an app on your phone, but where your critical data is stored, it is all private, secured, zero knowledge, end-to-end encrypted. And so that kind of created then a subsegment within the two.
So I guess just zooming out a little bit, for someone who doesn't know what exactly you are providing,
Mhm.
is what you're providing essentially an address that people can use for different purposes?
Correct. Yeah. So we provide multiple addresses. One sub address is the CMRA address, and that is for people. You need a CMRA address for your mail if you want someone else to receive your mail on your behalf. So we provide that. Now, some people aren't, many people do not come to South Dakota. Many clients don't come to South Dakota and change their residency. They just want a secure service or an affordable service, and many of the clients, if not a majority of them, are going international, or they're traveling on that use. They're not necessarily the RV folks. We are getting more people like the traditional RVer that lives in their RV most of the year. We're getting more of those, but that really wasn't our sweet spot when we began. So yes, I think that answers your question. Really, it's to be able to have your mail in no matter where you are in the world. Your mail is in your inbox of either your Proton mail or an app.
Right. And I guess I've seen services like yours. I
Mhm,
know I was
mhm.
taking a look at, I think, Northwest Agents, something like
Okay.
that. I forgot the formal name for it, but there's quite a few services like this. So one thing I didn't like about them is they don't have any kind of end-to-end encryption or zero
No.
knowledge side of anything they did. And so what they do is, a lot of people open these for privacy purposes
Yep.
or for their businesses, and they're getting official government paperwork, which probably has a lot of sensitive information
Yeah.
on it.
Absolutely.
And what they do is they just scan it and upload it on their servers for you to view in a web portal. And do you mind expanding a little bit right away on
Mhm.
kind of what separates you from that kind of
Okay.
generic
Great.
example?
Yes, I can. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure without looking it up, Northwest Agents, because that sounds familiar to me, is because we work with a lot of registered agent services. So I
Mhm.
do believe some of these registered agent services that will represent you in the state you choose for your LLC or your corporation, they also will include mail. I just learned of another one here in South Dakota that was new to me. A client is using LegalZoom has mail service here now in South Dakota, and they can bundle that into your other legal services for company formation. So I would imagine they're bundling that in with their registered agent. And to your point, yes, even the registered agent, and we could talk a little bit about that services. They're very not very secure, and you're really trusting your information and your data on third-party servers that are very vulnerable to exposure. Most of that exposure is, of course, as you talk all the time, is breaches, data breaches. But there's also the discovery that where this falls under the third-party doctrine, where your data on that server is subject to a third party, or they are a third party. Therefore, for legal reasons or an agency, they can then access that information or request access to that information without your knowledge. And that's a really big concern for me, that when an agency can kind of bend the rules and can can play with, oh, this person has a third degree connection to an international person of concern, we want access to all their information, so forth, stuff like that. So yeah, that those are some of my big concerns, and we that's how we can circumvent these concerns or mitigate these issues with certain levels of service that keep an end-to-end encryption, and or we keep the data minimal in our environments. We keep the data minimal in our environments so that you can move it over to your environments and you have complete control of the information. And even if we get served a subpoena or whatever, we can say, well, we don't have anything. Okay, we sent that all on, and as a routine procedure on our SOP, our standard operating procedure, we don't keep things for after X amount of days, and so we don't have that information anymore. That's where the ultimate privacy comes into the privacy post.
Nice. That's really cool. And I definitely want to talk about a lot of those privacy protections,
Yep.
especially as we get
Yes.
into it. But before we get there, I kind of had a really interesting discovery because it's really hard to research these topics.
Hmm.
How do I get a private home address? How do I
Yeah.
do XYZ for privacy? There's very few resources out there. And it's
Yep.
one of the reasons why I brought on Jonathan Steele recently to interview him about that. And I believe you either saw that or
Yes.
listened to that. But an interesting discovery is it's actually a lot easier to research these topics if you, instead of putting private home address, digital nomad address,
Yes.
or RV address.
Yep.
They actually all have the same issues. These
Yep.
people struggle to get residential addresses that aren't actually where they physically are all the time and
Right.
make that public information. So,
Yep.
what's kind of the intersection that you're seeing between the privacy community, digital nomad community, and kind of this RV community?
Yeah. So let's really define a residential address.
Yeah.
So that's what really, there's even this really is it's kind of a frustration with me, Henry, is because there'll be services that say your residentialaddress.com or something like that. And like, it's not a residential address. It's a CMRA commercial address. And there are certain things you cannot use that for, period. Personal bank accounts, you cannot use a PMB or a commercial mail receiving agency address, period. Your account will eventually get closed if you use those. You cannot open a new account with a commercial registered agency address or even a commercial business address. You need a residential address. And it's always best to choose a residential address if you're a nomad or if you're location independent or you're creating some arbitrage of a friend or a family member that agrees like, hey, I want to use your address for my bank account. No problem, you can use it. That's all they need. They don't do, minimal banks will do a validation of that address as far as do you truly live there all the time. And then you can also define live, define where I reside. I mean, that is in every state that's very convoluted, or it's a very gray area to say, yes, I live there. And so you can use a residential address for that. So let's go back up to the commercial mail receiving or the commercial address. There are people that do move their residency to South Dakota, and they need a residential address. They need a residential address for typically three things: W-2 work, for a banking address for their personal banking, and for voting. Even Florida, and I believe Texas, I don't look at Texas as much, but you need a residential address for voting. And so we do provide a residential address for any of our clients who want to vote. And one of the reasons a lot of people want to vote because it's the foundation of them being Americans. They're very patriotic about it on all both ends of the spectrum. But there's also a reason that people want to vote is they want to establish their domicile in South Dakota. And one of the important things to establish your domicile is you are registered to vote in the state, that's your tax state, and you are actually voting. Just registering is not enough. If a state is trying to claw you back, they're going to check, do you vote, or are you registered to vote, and do you vote? Okay, so yes, and we do provide a residential address. We detail that more on worldpost.io, but we have a special program for residential address. It's actually very hard to get a residential address. There are services out there that also provide residential addresses, but they work a little bit in the shadows. And how to get them, you can find it if just through some research, but they are more expensive than people realize. And so people try to use a PMB, a CMRA, and their PMB box as a residential address. They think that they're circumventing everything by putting apartment for the PMB. So typically it's PMB 210, and they'll say, I'm just going to change PMB for private mailbox to APT, and I'm good. I got a residential address. No, all the systems, and now that AI is kicking in, it's going to even be more difficult to do that. They can check the USPS database and they can see that it's a residential or it's a commercial address, bam, right away in 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's someone I know behind the scenes and myself constantly have to deal with address issues.
Yep.
And we talked about how in this past year, we don't know something's really clicked behind the scenes in the past year because certain addresses we've used for pretty mundane things
Yep.
have started being flagged now, and services that I never thought required an address to be residential, and I don't
Yep.
think they legally do, they just prefer it,
Yep.
are starting to give us problems for,
Yep.
again, I
Yeah.
can't express how mundane some of these things are. It's like generic shopping.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about this, and there really is no good solution that we found. So I think most people listening to this are going to fall in probably a general, or I don't know if I cut you off first. I don't.
No, nope, you
Okay.
did not.
A lot of people fall into a general camp, I'm guessing, which is they either have maybe an address that they own or have under a
Hmm.
trust, or they might just rent, or they live with family, but they just want an address to be able to ship things privately. And
Yep.
I think a private mailbox does a good job of that. That's all you need.
Hmm.
I have one. I use it to ship things and receive things. I think the problem really comes up when you actually have to vote.
Hmm.
Especially with voting, because in most jurisdictions that I'm aware of, if not all of them, where you vote, your residential address is public. It's not just I'm sharing it with the government. It's no, anyone who looks at voting records, which is public information, can view the residential address tied
Right.
to your name.
Yep.
So how does someone listening to this podcast get the best of all worlds? What are their options?
Yeah. And I've been with this voting experiment that we're done this year because there's restrictions now in South Dakota in the last couple of years that non-full-time residents, they're restricting their ability to vote, and it's created a little bit of controversy. But I am learning fast that yes, your voting records are fairly public, and even the email addresses are being accessed by special interest groups. And thank goodness, I used an alias, my typical alias service, and actually the county asked me, like, this is a very strange email address, and I explained it to them. We're like, oh, okay. But
You know the email I use, which
mm,
always gets laughs or questions. I have omg.lol. It's a web service that you set up as a profile, but pretty much I claimed hen. So my email I give to people publicly is hen@omg.lol. And it's a fun little. It's easy, but people always question if it's real.
yeah, I hear you,
Yeah.
and I get a few questions now and then, and I explain the concept, and it's like, oh, I never thought about that. But
Yeah.
so we will be rolling that out to customers as well to be able to use an alias, especially on the mid-level or the people that are just going down the rabbit hole on privacy. Provide them with an alias for their voting and stuff. If they don't understand it or they don't want to use it, we will provide them an alias under our service to at least receive those and automatically forward those emails. But yes, so how do they get best of all worlds? I think part of it is really truly choosing a state, and if you really do want to vote, and if it's important for you to vote, or if it's part of your strategy, the address we provide, the people using that address, they have access to that address, but they don't live there. So it's really not a home address, it's a residential address. They claim that they meet the requirements, that they would reside there when they return back to South Dakota for whatever reason. But that's part of I think that's part of the arbitrage, and also family members. Having a family member that's not too concerned about their privacy, and say, hey, can I use your address for voting? Can I use it for certain registrations and stuff? Can you write me a room rental lease? On basically a napkin lease, I call it, and I can use that as my address for certain things where I need to prove, that they need documentation of what my address is. So that's how you can mitigate that aspect of it. One thing I would have to say to people is, if you don't, and a lot of people say, I don't want to involve my family.
Right.
I don't want to get
You're
them
just
in.
shifting
Yes.
yeah.
And so what people really need to understand is residential addresses they are in doing it correctly, they are a limited resource. And most people, when you give them the price for a residential address, they're like, oh, I don't want to do that. So people understand it, if you want privacy, even when it comes to private mail, if you don't want your information on a janky server, there's a price involved. There's cost involved. And people really need to understand that if you want a level of privacy, it's going to cost. You're gonna have to pay for it. It can't, it's not going to be a free service, or it's not going to be a minimal service. And so it's important for people to understand that. But so for the residents, for the residency side to have a residential address, I think, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. I guess that's yeah,
It's a tricky one.
it is a tricky one. It is a tricky one, and it is getting more tricky. They're getting more and more the requirements and so forth. They're getting more aware of residential addresses and the importance of having a residential address.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a lot of questions I'm going to ask, including I know you
Mm.
mentioned it's going to cost, but I definitely want to touch on free or more budget options for people to explore, if any, down the road. But in the meantime, the government seems to care more about your residential address than how trustworthy you are to drive a multi-thousand-pound vehicle. So
Uh,
why is that? And I'm not even criticizing it, but I think it's a fact that like in terms of
yeah.
priorities, a residential address is very high up. So what is the reasoning for that?
I can't answer that. I without more further thought and about that. I wasn't prepared for that question as far as the, I don't know. And it's been a banking requirement unbeknownst to most people since the Patriot Act. That's 24 years, 22 years. That's been but the banks had not been really, really addressing it until recently. In the last few years, they've really, really started addressing that residential address. And voting, the voting integrity with what is it? Maybe the 20, maybe the 2020 elections really brought awareness to, where people live and their residential address. Maybe maybe it's something to do with fraud, as far as scammers and stuff, stealing credit cards and so forth. Maybe that's, or opening fake bank accounts, maybe that has something to do with that. I don't know. But for me, the important thing is that we all don't fit into that box, that we have this residential address.
Yeah, that's actually what was crazy to me is reading, especially on Reddit. I was reading a lot of people who prefer to not own a home. Many people, I mean, I'm in California, and a lot of people don't have homes or even places to live, and that's a serious problem in California. But it's also a serious problem in New York and many other states around the U.S. And some people choose a digital nomad lifestyle where they don't want a permanent residential address. And it was really sad to read some of the stories because some of those people didn't have close friends or family for whatever reason or another. So they didn't even have the choice to ask someone they know to kind of have an address for them. And I think it's crazy that someone who makes a lifestyle choice like that can't even vote. I feel like that's one of the most undemocratic things that I've read in a long time.
Yep. Yeah, and now and with that, if you yeah, that's very interesting that you say that way, because it's like if you are someone that's disadvantaged, and you are between you're between homes, or you whatever, and you're at a shelter, it's a lot easier for those people in that position to be able to vote, and they have some resources that. But if you don't fall into that category, but you are a digital nomad or a nomad, and you don't live in a specific state for a period of time where you consider that you have a physical home there, yeah, it is very challenging. And we're really back to the price, where I think there has to be some tipping points to justify the cost. And that would be, you have employment, a W-2 job, where you are have W employment salary, and you're like, my parents are in Illinois. I can use their address, but then I would be associated to Illinois for my state taxes, and I'm never there, so I'm not going to use their address. And they say the only other choice is, okay, I'm in South Dakota for my nomad residency. They see the price difference between state income tax in in California or Illinois, and they're like, okay, I'm going to save $10,000 a year in income tax in South Dakota. I can afford a monthly fee for a residential address.
Hmm.
If it's just if it's just a personal statement or a personal, I don't know what you'd call it, the name escapes me right now, where it is your privacy is your virtue. You're like, to then justify a cost, it's a little harder to do that cost justification. You know what I mean?
Right. And it changes on a person by person
Yep,
basis.
yep, yep.
I guess a question that came up along the way, how does someone who does have a lot of wealth on the opposite end of the spectrum, who lives in California, who doesn't have access to maybe South Dakota's laws, let's pick, I don't know where these people live. I know LeBron James was playing for the Lakers for some time, so let's use LeBron James. I assume he was living in LA. LeBron James can't put his residential address
Right.
on the ballot to vote.
Yeah.
There's just no way. And if he
Right.
does, that's crazy.
Right.
Anyone who has any kind of publicity won't be doing that. So does LeBron James not vote? What's he doing?
That's a very good question. I think people in that position, they have enough resources that they can definitely make it work. You know,
See, I want to know what the answer is, because that's my like in my head I go, yeah, they have resources to do anything they want, but I'd love to know what exactly they're doing.
yeah. And I don't know, but I do know, not direct clients with me, but I know from other clients that they have friends and first, second degree friends or family that are very wealthy from California, but they have a physical home here in South Dakota. They do their tax strategy to minimize their time in California, and then this is their tax residency. And they have the freedom and the flexibility to have a loft downtown, and have it empty 6 months out of the year, and they don't have to worry about Airbnb in it or whatever. Or maybe it could even be an Airbnb. They could say, I tell you what, let's take this loft and we'll purchase it. We'll turn it into an Airbnb, and then it's our residential address. Bing,
Got
bada
it.
bang, it's done.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess that's not a bad little workflow then to have a second. But that requires a lot of resources. I know,
It does.
especially there's a lot of talk right now about people struggling to get their first homes. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
getting a second one is definitely not an easy thing to ask people for.
Right. Right.
While we were talking on the note of just homelessness in general, Humboldt State is a state university in California, and I'm close enough to Humboldt where to hear about this kind of stuff, but 19% of students there at some point in the last year were homeless,
Yeah.
and there's no way every single one of those people has a family member or a friend that they could shift liability to. And I know that privacy is probably not the number one thing they're thinking about,
Right.
but I think more about voting and those types of rights that aren't being guaranteed to people in those situations, which is really sad. Yeah, it's especially sad when if you're someone who is in that situation and you feel that the politicians are in any way responsible for that, you don't have the power to know.
Yep.
This is a big tangent. To get back on track a little bit and to really dig a little bit more into the nitty gritty here, I want to ask why South Dakota is special. And special for somebody who lives in South Dakota is the first question. And if it's still special to someone who, let's say, is living in California, and how they could still utilize South Dakota or how they can't.
Great question. So South Dakota became prominent as a residency option for people that are location independent. Back in the 80s, there was a huge economic downturn that really hit South Dakota, and the Janklow, the governor at the time, was trying to find ways to bring to bring economic growth to the state. I don't think it falls into as well as no fault divorces, but that was maybe the first thing. They became a no fault divorce state, so it was very people would come here to South Dakota just to get divorced. But really, back in the 80s, when it really that kind of the it was set in motion to become kind of like the Switzerland of the United States. And they created banking laws that were very attractive to get banking systems to make South Dakota their home office for their banking and their lending. And when they opened up they got rid of a lot of the regulations and stuff on banking. It just this influx of business came into South Dakota. With that came the trusts. They opened up the trusts as well, and South Dakota has the best trust structure in the country. But the trust structure has just grown the business here immensely, and with that, the LLC structures became very private and very open at around the same time. I'm pretty sure it was around the same time. But with that too was they needed more residency, people coming into the state as residents, and to attract people to claim South Dakota as their state of residency. Maybe it's for population demographics. I don't know. Maybe it's for congressional seats, whatever. But they opened up the how easy it is to become a resident of South Dakota. And South Dakota is the easiest state to become a resident of. That is a tax-free state. And it is just basically one night in a hotel. You have residency. One night in a hotel in South Dakota, go to the DMV, get your driver's license, you walk out the door an hour later.
I guess I've done that in the last year.
There.
So there I go.
Yeah, there. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so I think there was a multitude of things. It became this, let's innovate, let's grow our economy. And also South Dakota, it is a very conservative state, but they're all about autonomy and privacy, and I think that comes from their grassroots of being a frontier. They were a gateway to the West. They did have a gold rush in the Black Hills. They were lawless, and a lot of that is still just very ingrained in the culture here in this state. And so I think those are some of the pieces that made South Dakota attractive.
Okay, so it sounds like getting South Dakota residency for somebody who wants to utilize some of these privacy laws or utilize a service like yourself is fantastic. But what if somebody doesn't? And I guess an important thing that you can probably touch more on is to claim yourself as a South Dakota resident, you can't just spend and live in a different state all year. I assume that state's going to want state income tax if you do something like that. So what are the benefits of maybe setting up an LLC or getting a residential address through a service like yours if you don't plan to live there?
Yeah, and that gets a little tricky because what happens, and a lot of people do this, Henry, is where they come from Chicago and they come into to South Dakota, they change their residency. You have to sign an affidavit. It's basically, it's just you're signing that you do not have a residence someplace else in the States, that you are permanently mobile, you're location independent, whether that be international or national. So many people sign that, and it's not true. And I really don't encourage that because of what some of these people then do is they change their insurance for their car to South Dakota, and they never drive their car in South Dakota. They get they come from Chicago and they get the cheap insurance rates, which will bite them in the butt eventually, and so forth. So really, those people, the only time I have a caveat to that I would support is if you're in the next 12, maybe 24 months, you have a plan like in 2026 or 2025, I'm going international, or I'm moving to Mexico for a majority of the time. And you have this strategy. And I do have clients that say, you know what, I still have my home in Missouri, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, your long-term plan is not to have that home. So I think it's okay that you want to get this done now, so you're ahead of the 8 ball in all your planning. You're fine, I think, to do that because your future intention is to no longer have that residential address in whatever state you're in. So I think people have to. I think some people, and I do think it is a little abusing the system, and I think that some of the blowback on South Dakota is people kind of are abusing it a little bit, and I don't encourage that to be able to like have your cake and eat it too. Live in I don't know, Silicon Valley and have all the benefits of the weather and everything, but driving a South Dakota license plate vehicle and having insurance out of South Dakota. And I know people that do that. And I have a little hesitation. Let me just say hesitation with that. So.
Yeah, I always when I see Wyoming plates, I get interesting ideas as well. For the person behind the wheel. In California, of course. So I just want to get a little bit more into this. So that paper you sign, are you telling South Dakota that you plan to spend a majority of your time in South Dakota?
No.
Or that you're just not staying anywhere permanently?
Correct.
Okay, so you're not staying anywhere permanently within the scope of everywhere around the world? So that means that you're not allowed to stay in any particular place? Or can you, for example, stay 6 months in Portugal
Yeah,
without.
and I wish I would have thought of having that ready for it. I wasn't planning that far ahead on that depth of detail of the conversation. So this is a good question to answer as well. You are basically that you do not have another residency within the United States that you reside at. Okay.
Got it.
That's
But
really
you
what
can
you're
own other
citing.
property.
Yeah, you can own
Okay.
many. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
So you could have your Airbnb in
yeah.
California that
Yep.
you stay at once a week.
Hmm.
You could have another property in Chicago.
Yep.
Obviously, this is not something that most people will be doing, but really what they just don't want is people who stay permanently in a different location
Yep.
that's not in South Dakota.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then I assume the issue here, just so we're nuanced enough, the issue is that it's not the address itself. I assume, so let's say you do rent an apartment in South Dakota,
Hmm.
but you set up a mailbox through you guys,
Hmm.
and you claim your mailbox as your residential address for everything in South Dakota.
Hmm.
But you are still in South Dakota,
Yep.
but that's not actually a residential address.
Yeah.
Where does that land legally?
Yeah. So some people do that. I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's okay. So what they will typically in that situation and in other situations as well, when there's certain specific aspects of they need to disclose their residential address for, let's say, your W-2, you need to put that on your payroll that your physical address is this, and then it goes to that state for your state taxes and maybe your unemployment insurance. That's the biggest sticking point. People assess their own level of privacy needs and the risk. So that's going into systems that maybe, what is it, ADP, the big processing for payroll. Yeah, could their system be breached? That information could get out there? Absolutely. Is it less likely than being with a mail service where your personal address is at a mail service? That's probably has a higher probability of that happening. Probably not as big of a target as it would be the processing of payroll. So I guess some people do, like, they minimize the risk by only using their residential address when they need it for certain things.
I want to talk a little bit about your services now,
Hmm.
more deep dive. So, what's it look like if someone and I've already kind of done this because you gave me a little
Yeah.
demo
Uh-huh.
mock up on
Uh-huh.
Signal, and
Hmm.
we kind of went through the process of you sending me documents. What can someone expect if
Okay.
they visit Privacy Posts or your other service
Okay.
when
Yeah.
they
So
reach out?
So with Privacy Post, one thing is when many people go to the Privacy Post website, that is a static website running on a server outside of the U.S. and it's running on a private, not a private server, a virtual private server within a data center, but it is a very static website. And it was built that way by design. So the Privacy Post side, we're going to be doing a completely refresh of the website design. Because it's static, there's some costs associated to it that have not been prioritized right now. So there's still the privacy simple plan, which is no longer available. We could not we could just cannot do that level of privacy that we provide for what was it, $10 a month. It's not feasible. It's just there's too much manual process in it, and that we cannot provide that. So people will ask about the privacy simple, and we just say sorry, it's still on the website, but it'll be changed soon when it's not available. And people are understanding. They're not like, but you guarantee that price? It's on your website. Bait and switch. We haven't run into that, but it's good to put it out here just for transparency so people can understand that. So you want to, first of all, when some people come through the privacy focus avenues like you and other services that are promoted, we'll typically have a conversation. I'll say, okay, what is I hate this word because it is so overused, especially on Reddit, but I'm just going to say it. We talk about what is your threat level, okay? And if you're a huge advocate of privacy, and it's very important to you, or you don't want to be sharing your data with big data, you know, you're probably not going to cost justify Privacy Plus at, what is it, 300 a year. You're not going to cost justify that. So we're going to go a lot of back and forth, talk about the process and how we do the work, and you're probably not going to sign up because it's just not, you can't cost justify it. So the first thing is to really have a quick discussion on the threat level. And when I understand the threat level, if they are like we have a lot of embassy workers, diplomats that use the more the privacy stuff, both in the hybrid and whatever. And FSOs is a general term for them, foreign service officers. That's like, yeah, that's kind of important to not have, using an email address has been, breached 20 times, as part of you sign up for a service or associating to yourself and so forth. If you are in law enforcement, a lot of law enforcement people, they don't feel like they're getting the level of privacy and security from their agency. Prison's a big one. Working in a prison, I don't want to say too much to disclose it, but having, we're being a contractor in a prison and having your coworker have their car firebombed, probably like a Molotov cocktail, because they would not bring drugs into the prison. You want to protect your privacy. You're
Medical workers as well. Yeah.
yeah, and that's probably the bigger one is the medical workers. I'm an expert at this because I was a fan of Orange is the New Black, so that's my expertise on. But yeah, so and it's not the people in prison you have to worry about. It's the industry behind that are very motivated to make sure that they have a path for their business. So those people, it's like, yeah, they justified, and then we have that conversation and we come up with a solution that meets their needs. And a lot of times I do consultation with people, and within reason, it's at no cost. I get to a point where I have to say, hey, listen, we've talked enough back and forth. You either need to make a decision. You have a month to cancel it if this isn't right for you, but I cannot continue this free consultation over and over again. I just don't have the bandwidth for that. So I really understand their threat level and stuff, and then I assess the opportunity there by their threat level and the questions they ask. Sometimes I get tinfoil hat questions, and I'm like, oh, here we go again. No, I'm not a honey trap for this, for that essay. Okay, no, you don't have to worry. Okay.
Yeah, I still haven't figured out how to deal with that one. I've been accused of working for Google,
Oh, yep,
Apple,
yep,
the FBI,
yep.
apparently all three at the same time. I just, how do you even respond to that? It's a tough one, so I get it.
Yeah,
We receive them too.
and really quick on that, I have an awesome attorney that I do a lot of consultations with, and we just had a conversation this morning about a couple things, and he said, and I talk about this stuff. He says, Dallas, there are so many problems in this world that need attention with terrorism and politics and so forth. Tracking you and what services you're using it as an individual is not on the radar, on anyone's radar. Now, granted, I would assume all of our information is somehow is stored somewhere for later access. A dossier, as many people say. I believe that. I think there's a dossier on me and you and everybody else. But nobody's sitting in a room unless you're a highly like profiled individual going, oh, Henry, he just got a drink at Starbucks on whatever street. And then he's talking to these three people because their phones are connected together and the same blah blah blah. And so I think people go a little too overkill, go down the rabbit hole too much, and I really have to mitigate those.
I think the issue I've seen, because it's a sensitive topic, because when you say, I totally get what you're saying, but what a lot of people hear who care about privacy a lot is, oh, so they're saying I shouldn't care about privacy. I
Oh,
think
yeah,
what we're saying is there's a mismatch between what your threat is and the kind of mitigations that you're trying to implement.
exactly.
And when there's that mismatch is when we go, no, like we need to,
Yeah,
because there's a lot of issues that come with that mismatch. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into having to deal with a threat that large.
exactly.
So, yeah, I'm with you, and I wish that people were a little bit more real with the threats that they're experiencing.
Yeah.
Because some people, like we talked about, have to deal with actual real threats
Hmm.
where physical harm
Hmm.
or something can happen to them or their
Yep.
loved ones.
Yep.
And those are the people that need that max privacy that you're willing to offer,
Yeah.
not I just want to, which
Yeah.
is valid too. But I think as long as you have the awareness that it's not something that's necessary is the
Yeah.
important part.
And if you have the
Exactly.
resources to pay for that level of privacy, what I have to then assess is does this person, the little I know, are they willing to pay for the level of privacy that they need? And most of the time, no, they don't.
It's sad because this is I someone just made a post on our forum a couple days ago.
Hmm.
And the post was, how do I achieve privacy on the budget. And I went through every category on our
Mm-hmm.
website's resources: email, messengers, browsers, operating
Mm-hmm.
systems. It's almost all free,
Yeah, it
actually.
is. Yeah.
And I put together, you can check out our forum. I put together a whole chart of like 3 different people and every service they pick. So I pretty
Mm-hmm.
much put these personas together. The first one is someone who literally just signs up for Proton, uses all the other free services, and for them that costs them $13 a month. I came up with a hybrid one, which uses Tuda's mid-tier plan and Apple's cheapest 99-cent plan for their aliasing,
Yeah.
for their end-to-end encrypted cloud, and a couple other things, which comes out to $5 a month. And I even put together a $0 a month option. What the business that you're in, lucky for you, unlucky for everybody else, is that the more money you pay, I think the more privacy you get. And it's a pretty linear thing.
Yeah.
It's hard to get good privacy on a budget with addresses.
It is, and really, if we tried to do this on a budget, we wouldn't exist.
Yeah,
We would not.
I get it.
It's just simple math. We would not be able to provide the service to anyone. And to your point too, and we're maybe getting a little bit of a tangent here. We got to get back to the process,
We
and
will.
I'm totally with you on this stuff here. But I will have to say, without disclosing too much here, we donate to Signal every month per user. We donate to Signal. We donate to several. I mean, we have a premium plan with Proton.
As
It's
do we. Yeah.
expensive.
And yeah, I continually have been looking at Tuda, but there's reasons we can't right now.
Yeah.
But it's expensive.
And even if somebody is, does have a budget or does not, okay, has a limited budget, if they just a couple bucks,
Yeah,
you can, a couple bucks a month, but there's so many people that don't want to pay, I mean, absolutely nothing. And this is not the old saying, if it's free, you are the, what is it? What's that saying?
if it's free, you're the product. Is yeah.
And in privacy, you're not the product, so you have to pay something. It doesn't have to be a lot. So I really,
Agreed.
and so yeah, that kind of, but I'm with you as well on that. We really try to customize plan. And if you look, even if on a privacy level, if you look at our Privacy Plus plan and you go to the other services in South Dakota, it's the same price or more
Yeah.
for the other services, and you have no level of privacy with them. To get the in fact, if you were to really break down the services, the a la carte stuff that are within those, we are much cheaper. But those are for people who understand that and are looking at other services in South Dakota that have that lifestyle where I need to have a virtual mail service. Oh, I've looked at these 4 services. Okay, this makes sense. When someone's just looking for privacy without that other lifestyle motivation, then they look and go, that's just too expensive. And I would agree with that. And I could talk a little bit about that as well as some things that are better for them that want privacy with their address. And I do have some options to encourage people to look at. But let's back to the process. So we do an assessment. I'll go back and forth 2 times with people on email or Signal. I have conversations with people on Signal. Any other mail forwarding service provider out there, try to get a hold of them on Signal. Proton. A lot of Proton conversations, and we'll do consultations on Signal. Do very little video on Signal, but those are the 2 primary, is Proton and Signal. Some people on iMessage because they're whatever. So we'll do a little bit of back and forth, and if they say, "Yep, I want to move forward," before we move forward, I give them a frequently asked questions. I sent that to you. That answers a lot of the questions that people continue to ask and ask again, and so kind of the deep dive or a little bit of the rabbit hole questions. And so people need to understand that we need your identification. Period. We cannot move forward without your identification. You need KYC is a federal priority. Okay. People think, oh, you're private, so I don't have to share my KYC. So I explain that, and then I give them a rundown of the program, the price, and the agreement. And I say, if you have any more questions, give me a call, and then we can continue on this or message me. And then they say, yeah, I want to move forward. Then we exchange the identification through an encrypted platform, typically Signal or Proton. Most often Signal. They exchange their information. We complete the 1583. We do a video validation of them, and then they sign up for the service. All of their PII, their personal identifiable information, is stored zero knowledge end-to-end encrypted. It is not going on any server. WorldPost or PrivacyPost. That's the hybrid side of the WorldPost. We keep that off of the platforms. So it
I see.
is within an encrypted service. Okay. So then also, once they do the payment exchange, we are, and thanks to your assistance, and I'll be reaching out to you more because it's really because we don't have a lot of demand. People don't want to really give up their crypto, but we do have some people and they do pay crypto. And typically right now it's just through a wallet. Very, very small people want to do crypto. They typically, if we find another way, we have sort and in that FAQ, we have several options of how they can pay. It can be very private. It doesn't have to be, through a credit card. And a lot of people do, they pay for credit card because they use privacy.com. Okay. Both WorldPost and PrivacyPost supports privacy.com. We've validated privacy.com, so that can be in the WorldPost world as well. No problem. So anyway, we go through the payment stuff and then we get them signed up and we give them a box. They're good to go. When their mail comes in, if they're on the PrivacyPost side, we send it to them on Proton. We set an expiration date of that send. They get a picture of their mail. Then they either say up just every month, every month and a half, 2 months, whatever, they say send it to me. We have no storage fees. We don't have any, we don't have any meters because it's so manual process. We can't automate that. So we set it up so we just store it or whatever. They say, hey, could you forward me this specific letter? I need it right now. Or they'll get an important letter and they say, hey, I really need this now. Throw everything in an envelope and send it. Then I say, do you want it on cloud or off cloud? What I mean by that is, if you want FedEx or if you want UPS, it's going to be on a cloud somewhere, that address. But if you want it handwritten on an envelope, yes, UPS, the Postal Service is going to do some basic scanning of that envelope, but it's a little bit more private to do it that way than having it go to some, services that's going to be reselling that information, because that's part of their, these platforms that give you postage and stuff. I won't mention their names. So anyway, that's how that works.
Got it. And so, yeah, I myself and someone else had the same question right away, and maybe feedback too for the redesign. We were confused about how the service was end-to-end encrypted because it wasn't clear that mail was sent through Proton with the assumption that the other user was also using Proton.
Yeah. So
or do you do the password version of Proton so it's compatible with anybody's
never,
email?
no, we
Okay.
won't.
Okay.
And part of that is because of the coordinating and the workflow. Think of the nightmare workflow when you have
Yes.
10 people on, and you're promoting a non-private. Yeah. So
Email.
really,
Yeah.
when we first built this out, it was Tutanota and Proton, but we just didn't have enough traction to keep both of them running. So I would love to keep that. If I had more people that were on that as well, I would definitely keep that as an option. But there
Got it.
wasn't enough demand for that to keep that as an option, to have an A/B option. But no, it is a requirement to have Proton. Now, some people, like for example, we get a credit card for someone. And what we'll do is we'll take a picture of the front and the back of the credit card. They want that ASAP for maybe their online purchases. We'll send that over Signal. We won't do that over Proton because it's quick and easy. But most of the mail, when we have to scan it, we will do that then through a Proton. Yeah, a quick credit card would go through like Signal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think something that people should probably understand is that most of these services are automated. Not to the point where robots are doing everything, but it's the kind of thing where, someone might just take a photo and it's automatically behind the scenes uploaded to someone's account,
Yep.
Tied to that address. They don't even have to do anything probably.
Yep. Exactly.
And it sounds like, and I think that's almost what was surprising and kind of unbelievable about, I don't know if it's end-to-end encrypted.
Yep.
Because that would mean that someone's behind the scenes having to manually upload and send off every single email,
Yep.
which is respectable. And
Yep.
I think definitely that's a lot of time
that's too much work. There's too much room for error with that. That would be a nightmare. And that, again, because this is a manual process, and that's what we have to leverage these technologies. And even if it is through Proton, that is paired to the WorldPost non-private per se workflow. It's a lot of work to do that. It really, to scale PrivacyPost at the prices we charge, if I did completely transparent, Henry, if I did not boot up WorldPost this time last year, we wouldn't be in business right now.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Yeah.
We would not be in business. And I had to do a Hail Mary to, I'm looking at my lease for our processing center is a huge brick and mortar is a huge expense. And I was looking at my lease being renewed in July 1st of 2024, and I had 6 months in my lease to go. And I'm like, I'm just going to do this Hail Mary. And I had to make this, it was like literally a fork in the road. It's like, if I start WorldPost and I get a couple hundred clients in WorldPost, I'm making a commitment to people that this is going to be their address for a long period of time. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, yes, this business is going to be long term. And I even had people that contacted me like, hey, it looks like you're new. Are you going to be around in a year? A lot of these people like, hey, I chose this service in this city or whatever, and they went out of business or they quit working with my operator, my cloud service that I use for my mail. That's a whole other conversation. And I get tired of always having to change my address. I just want one address and I don't have to go change everything again. I'm like, I can't make you a promise, but we are making a commitment here that we're going to make this work. And in that topic, I was just at I was at a networking event here in town, a startup networking event, and the people were talking about milestones or their wins for the week or whatever. And someone said to me, it was my turn to talk, and I said my win this week was in October. I was able to pay full rent by profits from or by the not the profits, but by the revenue of WorldPost and PrivacyPost.
Nice.
That's the first time. Now we're not completely out of the red yet, but yeah, our primary expense is brick and mortar, is the lease. I was able to pay that
Nice.
with proceeds from the service, and that was like, whew.
Nice. No, that's
Yeah,
really awesome.
yeah,
And I bet that feels good.
it
And
does.
I hope that it continues to do well.
Yeah,
Um, because it's a really important service. And again, it's really hard to scale this stuff. I think people just don't really realize the expense
right.
of these kind of services, and it's
Yep,
why
yep,
it's one of the few things
correct.
in privacy. Going back to what you said, the context of the post is someone who is on a budget and really needed to keep it low. But we also encourage what you as well do, which is try to support at least one organization when you can, because otherwise these services just don't exist. But your service has even more, I think, needs. Uh,
Yeah, and to this person that did this post, if they go to WorldPost, they can get they can get probably one the if not the cheapest service. I'm pretty confident in the country service. They can get a box through our lowest basic plan. It doesn't have a lot of mail to it for $5.99 a month. I think it's $5.99 a month. Okay.
that's pretty good.
Yeah. Now we do. I have someone who on the privacy side is going with a Zoomer plan, which is like $7.99 a month, and we're having some discussions about the hybrid. Normally, I keep that for the millennial plan, which is at like $12.99 a month. I'm talking with him. He's just one person. He's not a couple. Most of the times people do the hybrid because they got a partner that doesn't want to do the privacy. So we're trying to work out a deal. But I mean, if someone wants to come in and they have a level of privacy, yeah, it's not going to be next to free, but it's not going to be that expensive.
I guess kind of a quick question as you were talking. Why have two different services, and why did you not use one service and offer like different packages with different levels of privacy, so to speak?
Yep. Because to build out the infrastructure of the automation that's provided by the cloud provider, that would be hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it wouldn't be at a privacy level that we would invest in. So on the WorldPost side, we partner with Anytime Mailbox. So Anytime Mailbox provides the infrastructure, they provide the lead generation, they provide the support, they provide the billing, they provide all of that stuff at an expense, but they provide that. They probably take about a 60% cut out of our revenue.
Wow.
Yeah, but they provide all that so that we can then just focus on the operation side. Okay.
Mhm.
And so then what we do is we find the points in that process. Anytime they're not bad for privacy, but they're like any service that's in the cloud, right? There's vulnerabilities there. And so we find those vulnerabilities, and that's where we provide those hybrid privacy services that can mitigate the leaking of details that people want to protect. And if they want to, they using our hybrid model, we can provide, bar none, any other anytime mail service processor that uses them, privacy that nobody else has. I'll give you a couple examples. First of all, back to the sign up. Normally, when you sign up with a cloud provider, you're taking your identifications, your passport, your driver's license, your 1583, you're loading it into their cloud. When you come through us, we do not load that into their cloud. Even if you're WorldPost hybrid, we keep that in our system, in our end-to-end encrypted zero knowledge, and we keep it locally so that it is not going to a third-party cloud system where it is probably sitting on some, AWS, server someplace, right? Some instance. The second thing we do is when we give them the choice, if there's confidential data that they don't want scanned and put up into the cloud, we have a cover sheet we scan. It says this scan has been sent to the client, EDE encrypted, zero knowledge, to record the scan within the system of any time in the cloud system, but it does not have the contents. It only tracks that a scan was done, and therefore they had a one page of that scan or whatever pages, and then to help keep track of billing. So so your contents of your envelopes and your mailings are not put in the cloud, nor are your personal data, your personal information. Not even your home address is in the cloud. We don't even put in that. We put in your PMB address in the cloud. That's your address because your real address is on that 1583. So we protect all that information from going to a cloud service. And so that is, some of the extra levels of services that we provide on both the WorldPost side and the PrivacyPost side.
Nice. And then a quick question on the 1583. It's a federal requirement to be an operational business. You have to accept that from people. Even if you get a private mailbox locally, they're going to ask for the same form. Yep. When you say zero knowledge, are you saying that once someone submits a 1583, you're unable to access it?
No, so that would be like mincing the words of zero knowledge. What I mean from zero knowledge from any other service, we have to have access to that upon request to provide that information. Okay. So no, that is not the level of zero knowledge for that. But if your contents of your mail that you receive, and once we send it to you and then we remove it from our sent box, we no longer have that information. It's no longer stored on a server. So that truly is, once that's sent and we delete any information or any parts of that information on Proton or whatever, then we don't, that is zero knowledge, because then only that receiver of that, they can say, I'm going to keep it in my Proton, what is Proton drive called? I'm going to keep it in Proton drive. That is truly zero knowledge to them. But your documents and this is where people get hung up, your documents for your identity, and that we have to access them. If anybody says, or if any agency or legal discovery process says, we want to see the documents for this box, they have to come to us and only us. They can't go to Google. They can't go to Anytime Mailbox. They can't go to iPostal One or whatever. They can't go to AWS. They have to come to us for those documents. And if they come to us, we'll say, well, tell you what, well, why do you need them? We haven't had that happen yet, but we'll do a little inquiry. We're just not going to bend over and give those documents to them.
Right. And so maybe because zero knowledge from an encryption point of view, I think some of the more nitpicky people wouldn't like the fact that you still could access that. Yeah. So maybe with that one, it would be like encrypted at rest and then end-to-end encrypted in transit.
See, that doesn't cover it, because yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe I've not had this question, when in discussions in that, but it is probably good to have. So that would be, because is your data, when you have your data on Google Drive, I mean, it's encrypted when it's at rest, but the keys are shared with Google.
Exactly.
So yeah, and I'm open to how I could frame that better, because I don't want it to be misleading. The important thing that I'm trying to impress upon people is that only WorldPost and that individual has access to that information. No one else.
Yeah, it's more of a technicality that I'm just trying to make sure I understand, because you can't do better than that. At the end of the day, someone or something has to get the mail, open the mail, possibly see the mail, as an individual. But once it leaves their hand, you're doing quite literally everything you possibly can.
Yeah.
You're encrypting it with end-to-end encryption. You're also setting it so it deletes on your end, and it even deletes on their end unless they choose to save it.
Right.
So it really is best case scenario. And then my next question, just because I did
Mhm.
see this on the Privacy Post site, you also have some version of a warrant canary to alert people if something goes wrong. Is that still a thing?
It's a man. We know we've had very little demand for it. If I get interest in demand for it, I would definitely, when we do a reboot, I would remove that to a degree. We did have a very intricate process for the warrant canary, but there was never really any need for it, and never no ever a service level that wanted it, so we didn't really maintain that. So if anybody asked that, first thing I'd say, we don't have that yet, or we no longer provide that. But we could, if there's a need for it, and if we get enough interest in it, absolutely, I'd love to have a canary. I'm all about that. I would love to automate that.
I'm trying to outline that, like, that is the only possible thing that I think could possibly be better. And I think it takes away from the discussion of, I think, the amount of privacy and security that you already offer people in the first place.
Hmm.
So I hope that me asking these doesn't take away from
No,
that, because
no, 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 no.
it's you just can't beat this anywhere that I
Hmm.
found, or that I'm sure you found as well. I'm pretty happy, and I feel like we did a good job diving into your services,
Hmm.
yourself, South Dakota. But now I kind of want to take it back to people listening. What are the options that somebody has, or what would you suggest to somebody listening about just general privacy for their addresses? Not necessarily that they have to even get a private mailbox, but what are some of the things that you have to share with them?
Yeah, so I really do think if they're looking at the physical aspect of privacy, to it all depends on your resources as far as, can you have your Amazon packages delivered to your work? Or to another location where it may be, of course, Amazon Locker, whatever you can. But heck, I did a little test of trying to order everything to the lockers, and maybe 80% I was able to order and have it to a locker, but it just gets very complicated. The lockers are full, and this was 3 years ago, so I think it's gotten even worse. The lockers are full, it's not available, the product is too big for a locker, blah blah blah. But try to mix that up with having maybe your Amazon stuff go to your home. I think people get so focused on the physical privacy of their home address, protecting it from everything. They're like, oh, Amazon Prime is so convenient and cheap. I'll just have it delivered to my home. Well, you just blowing your privacy as far as your home address. I can guarantee that's shared in so many different levels. With the fulfillment by Amazon and the third parties that are using Amazon for fulfillment and so forth. So if I would say at minimum, if someone really want to protect their home address before they even use our service, if they don't have a location independent lifestyle, really our service is for location independent people or people who are creating LLCs, but is get a PO box, or not even a PO box, but go to within your local area where it's not too far to drive. Go there and get a private mailbox. Talk to the owner. Sign up there on site where you show them your IDs and they fill out the 1583 by hand. Then there's questions, how they're going to, are they going to throw that in a file cabinet or whatever, but build a relationship with them so that once you start wanting to increase levels of privacy, tell them your story. Hey, I'm really concerned about my privacy. For You can even give them a mitigating reason, and then once they get to know you, and one other thing I suggest you do is open your packages there, and you open them in their center, and you go, oh, I'm so excited, this package. You open it up and they can see that you're open up. You're not all shadowy, and you're not all elusive. You can build trust with them. And then you can say to them, hey, I'm going to have all my Amazon stuff come to John Doe. Do you have a problem with that? No, not a problem at all. You can do that. No problem. So then you start getting your stuff coming to John Doe to that address. I even had situations where these services will even let you not even, they know you can say to them, hey, everything coming to John Doe, can you have it? Can you just put it in my box for notifications? My physical box? Yeah. Gotcha. Anything John Doe, I'll just assign it to, box 512 or whatever. So you build a relationship of trust. That is by far better than doing nothing at all, by far. And then if you get to the other levels of privacy, I do have clients, and I did a podcast with Gabriel on Watchman Privacy. I didn't think of it until after he asked some questions and I did some research. I have a lot of people, Henry, that their home address is a PO box, and they have mastered the level of, let me rephrase that, their forwarding is a PO box. So all of their mail is forwarded to a PO box. They have that second layer of nothing is going to their home address. No what is it, the Apple tag, what are they called, is going to be sent to their home. They're going to be getting it at the post office. Actually, I do have clients who open all their mail outside of their location, so that if there's a tag in there, it's not going to identify their location. Then you can create that next step of, if you want a service from another state and you have that level of privacy requirements or desire to not even have people to know your state, then you can take that next step. So I think baby steps is better than nothing. People try to take a huge leap in their privacy. They're like, oh, it's too expensive, or it's too complicated, or my partner doesn't want to deal with this. I will do nothing. And so they do nothing. And things can be incremental. And they should. I think that's the best way to look at it, is to be. And what's really important, Henry, is if you're doing a reboot for whatever reason, hey, I'm moving to another state, I got a new job, those are the times where you are going to be like, the opportunity to really do a reset and a reboot of your privacy. That is when you can really institute those things like, hey, I'm going to have a new real address. Let's keep that as clean and pristine as possible.
Yeah, I think it's all really good advice. And the tough thing is, one mistake can cost a lot with
Yeah.
addresses. It's hard to move. The friction points of getting new addresses is really difficult. There's probably, you probably know this. If you don't, that's okay. But are there more people than addresses?
But I don't know. I would have to say probably.
Yeah,
I
that's
would
my
have to
guess as
say,
well.
yeah.
Yeah. Which really shows how in demand that kind of stuff is.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share about yourself, your services, before we start wrapping this up?
just really quick, I just want to reemphasize. I've been struggling just lately with, on the WorldPost side. I've been getting people who get the basic cheapest plan, and they have this elaborate LLC structure. Most of these people, I'm gathering, they're doing this for privacy, and maybe they have a vision of growing something. They'll start these LLCs in Montana or Wyoming and here in South Dakota, and these LLCs will be, mega trust wealth investors, and it's mega wealth at hotmail.com, and they are getting the cheapest plan as possible, and then we have to spend a lot of time on address integrity. We find that they have 4 LLCs pointed to a $5 a month box to us in this elaborate scheme of Wyoming and South Dakota and maybe some international stuff. And they all want to do it for $5. Okay. And and they don't want to spend more money than that. And it's like, if you have this grand plan and these visions of these LLCs, and then they're also their state filings, they're doing it wrong. Their state filings, they don't want to disclose their information, so they're making their physical office 112 South Main is their physical office. That's what they're putting in their state filings. And we're clamping down on those people. And please, if you're going to come in and game our model so that you can, use our address for this scheme of, and I really don't think, Henry, these people are scammers.
Yeah,
I think they're just trying to eke everything out for the little amount as possible for the future of their companies or their ID to grow. What I need to impress upon people is this address. There's a whole story behind this address. We created this address. We had to go to the city and the building owner, and we had this address 112 created for us. And we have spent a lot of resources, a lot of time, and a lot of reassurance on the integrity of this address. This address is our brand. And when people abuse and use it for what it's not intended for, or try to, kill 5 birds with one stone, I'm really getting frustrated with those people. And if they come to me and say, "Hey, this is my budget. How can I do this?" I am more than happy to work with these people. But these people that do this whole thing in the shadows, and they think they're going to game the system and game our business model, they're out. I just bumped another 25 people out.
No, I think it's really valid, and I would definitely share your frustration if I was in your situation, and definitely nowhere even near as maybe the level of commitment to a specific thing as you've put in. But we deal with it too on our ends with more minor things.
Yeah.
Not we didn't have to set up a whole establishment and set up all the legal
Yep.
paperwork and everything that I know you've had to do. I think again, people just really want the best of all worlds, and that's understandable, and I get that, but it definitely makes things complicated and it can
Yeah.
ruin things for everybody else.
It does. It
Um,
definitely it does. And one more
yeah,
thing on that point too, Henry, is just to say
yeah,
this. People will come to me and say, "Okay, I need this address. I need a residential address. Okay, this is the price. Oh, that's too expensive. I can't afford that. It's not in my budget." I'm like, "Okay, find another." I'm like, "Oh, or that, why is that so expensive? It's just an address." And I say, "This is our price. This takes a lot to curate these addresses and to secure these addresses." And they're like, "It's too expensive." And can you do it for a better price? I'm like, "No, I can't." "Go find someone else." "Well, there's nobody else that does it." What is it? It's like supply and demand. It's like, okay, if nobody else does it, there's a reason. There's a reason. And so if that is important for you to have this address, especially when people want to use this address for a business, or they're going to monetarily gain from this as a business, then they need to invest in it. So
yeah. No, I think that's all really fair, and I hope that it discourages anybody from trying to abuse it, because I'd be really frustrated by that too if
yeah,
I was
yep.
in your shoes, and I think most people would. And we see similar things again on a different scale and with different projects, but we see a lot of the same stuff where people really try to take like you give them an inch and they
Yeah.
take quite a bit more
And
than
we
that.
we, we had just
Yeah.
a major incident here where we got some plates for somebody, some South Dakota plates. This person signed up for our service about 6 months ago. They never ID'd themselves. We emailed them several times. You need to complete the ID process. They refused to respond to our email, so we closed their account. We got plates, car plates for them and registration. Brought them down to the Treasury, their version of the DMV here, and we put a fraud alert on them and said this person did not pass KYC, and I'm talking to the person that was assisting me, and we're new there, so we're establishing credibility. And I said, we have a motto: don't mess with our address. And not only did those plates get escalated to the state to lock this person out of registering a vehicle in the state, I had my private investigator do a background check on this person. Henry, he said this is the worst background check he's seen in 20 years of a person. The rap sheet in this individual was enormous.
Yeah.
Fraud, stalking, driving without a driver's license, third-degree assault. I mean,
Oh.
so we take this stuff seriously because we do not want that stuff attached to our address.
Right. Yeah. Privacy is not for legal purposes, and
Yep.
I think that it's especially when you have a business, you have to do so
Absolutely.
within legal restrictions. So,
Yep.
yeah, all makes a lot of sense. Well, I know that this is very maybe not what people are used to. It's definitely a new service that I think not a lot of people have familiarized themselves with. So I'd really love to hear the community's thoughts.
Yeah.
If you have more questions, definitely leave them in the comments.
Yep.
And
Please.
yeah. Can you
And
be reached anywhere or?
yes, so on WorldPost and on PrivacyPost, your Signal on PrivacyPost, Proton Mail on PrivacyPost is very clear and easy. Just one other thing with that, if you could please, just say, "Hey, my name's Andy, and here's my, I just need a little bit of information. They don't need to give me a book. They don't need to send me their driver's license, but these elusive, no signature or no, hey, thanks a lot, Tom." It just, in no subject line, it really is frustrating dealing with those people. Just, you can be a little friendly with me. It's like, yeah, I'm not scanning all this and creating a profile on you. And really, if any clients here, any people listening that are looking for an LLC structure and they're looking at Wyoming, please give me a call. We can provide you a far superior product here in South Dakota with the same advantages of Wyoming, with far superior privacy at a lower cost, bar none. I'm confident in that.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate everything you talked about today, and I know I learned a lot, and many other people learned a lot, and we really appreciate you and the services that you're building.
And
So,
thanks for giving me the time, Henry. I do really
yeah.
appreciate that.